They didn't come for the woman in the bed. They came for the 7-figure comma in her bank balance. I'm standing in the corner of the communal sunroom at Silver Pine, and if I close my eyes, I can almost smell the desperation. It's thicker than the scent of the industrial floor wax and the wilting sympathy flowers piled on the folding tables. 19 of them. 19 members of the Blackwood bloodline, all packed into a space that, for the last 1,826 days, only had room for two, my grandmother, Eleanor, and me. Look at them. There's Aunt Vera, draped in a pashmina that probably costs more than my monthly rent, dabbing at eyes that haven't seen a real tear since the 80s. There's Uncle Mark, checking his gold watch every 30 seconds as if he has somewhere more important to be than the bedside of the mother he hasn't called since her hip surgery. They're whispering, sharing rehearsed memories of a house they couldn't wait to sell, acting like this is a long overdue family reunion instead of a strategic boarding party. They think they're here for a celebration. They read the headline in the Bryan County Gazette. Elderly resident awarded $3 million in negligent settlement. To them, Eleanor isn't a person anymore. She's a jackpot. A windfall. A way to pivot their underwater mortgages and credit card debts into a comfortable retirement. But what they don't see, what they've completely ignored in their rush to hug a woman they barely recognize, is the small, red leather-bound ledger resting on Eleanor's lap. It's tucked under a white linen napkin, appearing like nothing more than a tray for her tea. They don't know that for 5 years, while the phone stayed silent and the mailbox stayed empty, that book was her only confidant. Every night, after the nurses finished their rounds and the facility fell into that heavy, haunting silence that only nursing homes know, Eleanor would click her reading lamp on. She would open that red book, and with the steady, disciplined hand of the third-grade teacher she used to be, she would take attendance. Who showed up today? That's the question that's going to dismantle this entire family by sunset. They think they're playing a game for millions, but they don't realize the final exam already happened. And every single person in this room, except for me, is about to find out they failed. To understand how we got to this room, you have to go back 5 years. You have to go back to the day the Blackwood legacy turned into a pile of cold, hard cash. The estate on Blackwood Lane wasn't just a house, it was an anchor. 2 stories of white clapboard, a wraparound porch that groaned in the wind, and rose bushes that my grandfather planted the day they moved in. For generations of us grew up there. We learned to walk on those hardwood floors. We measured our heights against the doorframe in the kitchen. When my grandfather died of a slow, grueling lung cancer, Eleanor lived there alone for 12 years. She mowed that massive lawn herself until she was 75. She drove her dented Buick to the grocery store. She was the definition of fine. Until she wasn't. One Tuesday morning, she reached for a mixing bowl on a shelf that was just an inch too high. A slip, a crack, and a fractured wrist changed everything. The doctors were blunt, she couldn't live in that big, drafty museum anymore. She needed care. She didn't ask her 4 children for help. She knew their schedules were too packed, their lives too complicated. So, she made the hardest decision a matriarch can make. She put the house on the market. It sold in 3 days for $450,000. She took every penny of that money and checked herself into Silver Pine, the only facility with an immediate opening. The fallout was nuclear. I remember the Blackwood Circle group chat exploding. Aunt Vera called it financial sabotage. Uncle Mark said Eleanor was pissing away the inheritance on a glorified hotel room. My own mother sat at her kitchen table and cried, not for her mother's injury, but for the loss of the family seat. To them, that house was their safety net. When Eleanor chose her dignity over their eventual payout, they didn't see a woman trying to survive. They saw a traitor. If she wants to spend all our money on a nursing home, Vera had texted me privately, then the nursing home can be her family now. And they meant it. After the move, the silence was deafening. No phone calls on her birthday. No cards at Christmas. No how is the wrist healing texts. For the first 6 months, Uncle Mark stopped by twice, stayed for 10 minutes, and spent 8 of them looking at his phone. My cousin Derek sent one text with a thumbs up emoji. Then, the visits stopped entirely. For everyone but me. I'm an ICU nurse. I work the night shift at the County General, 12-hour stretches of adrenaline and antiseptic. I know what loneliness does to the elderly. I've seen patients literally fade into the gray of their bedsheets because no one comes to claim them. I refuse to let that be her. Every Tuesday after my shift, and every Saturday morning at 10, I made the drive. I'd bring 2 hazelnut coffees from the gas station. The good kind with the real cream. We'd sit in her room, and she'd tell me stories about the kids she taught 30 years ago. I'd tell her about the chaotic energy of the ER. We laughed. We drank our coffee. And we never, not once, talked about why the chairs next to us were empty. But I watched her. I saw the way her eyes would flicker toward the nurse's station every time the elevator dinged, hoping, just for a split second, that it might be one of her children. And I saw the exact moment, about a year into her stay, when that hope finally died and was replaced by something much sharper. That was the night she bought the red ledger. By the second year, the atmosphere at Silver Pine began to shift. It wasn't just the isolation anymore, it was the neglect. As a nurse, I'm trained to see the things people try to hide. I noticed the condensation rings on Eleanor's bedside table, meaning her water pitcher hadn't been touched in 12 hours. I noticed her gowns weren't being changed. Then, I noticed the marks. They were faint at first, purple ovals on the underside of her forearms. They weren't fall bruises. Gravity doesn't make bruises in the shape of human fingers. The girl on the night shift gets a little impatient, Eleanor whispered when I confronted her. She says I move too slow. She doesn't mean it, Maya. She's just tired. I felt a cold, sharp rage ignite in my chest. I went to the facility director. I was told the incident reports were confidential. I asked for the care logs. I was told I didn't have the legal standing to view them because I wasn't the power of attorney, and Vera was, despite not having visited in 14 months. I called Vera. I told her the facility was dangerous. I told her Eleanor was being handled roughly. Maya, you're always so dramatic, Vera sighed over the phone. It's a top-tier facility. You're probably just seeing age spots. Stop trying to stir up trouble. We have enough on our plates. The family didn't just ignore Eleanor, they actively gaslit me for trying to protect her. They started a second group chat, one without me, where they discussed how I was positioning myself for whatever scraps of the house money were left. They told each other I was playing the long game, using my visits to guilt Eleanor into changing her will. I was working 70 hours a week, driving a 10-year-old Honda with a cracked windshield, and eating ramen so I could afford to buy Eleanor the mystery novels she loved and the hazelnut coffee she craved. I wasn't positioning myself for anything except a nervous breakdown. Then came the Wednesday night that changed everything. A nurse from the midnight shift called me, her voice trembling. Your grandmother fell in the bathroom. The call button in her room wasn't working, Maya. She was on the tile for 4 hours before anyone found her. Eleanor's hip was shattered in 2 places. When I called the family from the surgical waiting room, the responses were clinical. She's 80, falls happen, Mark said. Let us know when she's out of recovery, my mother added. Not one of them came to the hospital. I sat there alone, staring at my hands, smelling the antiseptic of the waiting room, and I realized that the Blackwood Circle wasn't a family. It was a predatory pack waiting for an old woman to stop breathing so they could scavenge the remains. But as I walked into the recovery room and saw Eleanor, pale, frail, but with eyes that were suddenly as hard as flint, I saw she had the red ledger clutched to her chest. Maya, she rasped, her voice paper-thin but steady. Call that lawyer you mentioned. The one who handles the ugly cases. Grandma, are you sure? I asked. She opened the ledger to a fresh page. She wrote the date, the time of the fall, and the names of the children who hadn't called. Then she looked at me and smiled a smile that made my blood run cold. I've spent 37 years grading children on their performance, sweetheart, she said. It's time for the final report cards. I didn't know then that the lawsuit we were about to file would result in a $3 million settlement. And I certainly didn't know that the biggest threat wasn't the nursing home we were suing. It was the family members who were currently staring at the boarding light on their gate, about to fly in for the kill. The phone call that officially severed the family didn't come from a lawyer. It came from my mother, Linda, at 11:14 on a Tuesday night. I was sitting on my couch, still in my blue hospital scrubs, staring at a stack of student loan statements that looked like a mountain I'd never finish climbing. My back ached from lifting patients, and the smell of antiseptic seemed to have permanently seeped into my skin. "Shelby," she said, her voice tight and sharp, skipping any greeting. "Donna is livid. She says you're positioning yourself." I rubbed my eyes, feeling the weight of the double shift I'd just finished. "Positioning myself for what, Mom?" "I just got home from 12 hours in the ICU. For the house money. Whatever's left of it. Donna says you're the long game player." Her words. "She thinks you're spending all this time at Silver Pine to ensure that when your grandmother passes, you're the only one in the will." Craig agrees. He says it's unnatural for a 28-year-old to spend every Saturday morning in a nursing home unless there's a payout at the end. I looked at my kitchen counter. There was a Honda Civic key fob with a cracked casing next to a half-eaten granola bar. "Mom, Grandma is paying $8,000 a month for that room. By the time she's done, there won't be enough left to buy a used car. Tell Donna her inheritance is currently being spent on industrial-grade applesauce and physical therapy." "Then stop going," my mother snapped. The bluntness of it took my breath away. If there's nothing to gain, why put yourself through it? Why make the rest of us look bad? Every time you post a photo of her or mention a visit, you're just throwing it in our faces that we're too busy. You're making her hope for visitors who aren't coming, Shelby. You're the one causing the disappointment. I gripped the phone so hard the plastic case creaked. In my mother's world, the cruelty wasn't their absence, the cruelty was my presence, because it served as a living mirror to their neglect. If I stopped showing up, Eleanor would be truly alone, but the family's conscience would be clean. They wanted the silence to be absolute so they could pretend she didn't exist until the probate court called. "I'm not stopping, Mom," I said, my voice trembling with a mix of exhaustion and fury. She hung up without saying goodbye. I sat in the dark for a long time after that. I thought about the red ledger sitting on Eleanor's nightstand. I realized then that I wasn't just visiting a grandmother, I was witnessing a crime of apathy. But as I looked at my bank balance, $14.22, I realized the family was right about one thing: I was playing a game. I just hadn't told them the rules yet. The marks on her skin were the final straw. It's one thing to be lonely, it's another to be a victim in a place that's costing you your life savings. It started with the water pitcher, always bone dry when I arrived on Tuesday mornings. Then it was the smell of the room, a sour, heavy scent that told me the linens hadn't been changed in days. But the bruises were the signature of a deeper rot. I'm a nurse. I know the difference between a thin-skin bruise and a grip bruise. These were the latter, finger-shaped purple blossoms on her inner bicep, where someone had clearly hauled her out of bed with more force than empathy. When I demanded to see the facility director at Silver Pine, I was met with a wall of corporate beige. "Mrs. Blackwood is a fall risk," the director told me, not looking up from her monitor. "She's elderly. Her skin is like tissue paper. Bruising is common." "Not in the shape of a hand, it isn't," I countered. "I want the night shift care logs. I want to see who was on duty at 3 a.m. on Sunday." "I'm sorry, Shelby. You aren't the power of attorney. Your Aunt Donna is. Unless she requests those records, my hands are tied." I walked out of that office feeling like I was screaming underwater. I called Donna. I told her mother was being mistreated. I told her we needed to file a complaint, to move her, to protect her. "Shelby, stop being so dramatic," Donna sighed. I could hear the clink of ice in a glass on her end. She was at a country club mixer. Silver Pine is a 5-star facility. If you keep harassing the staff, they might ask her to leave, and then where would she go? My house is being renovated. Craig is in the middle of a divorce. You're the only one with a one-bedroom apartment, so unless you want her on your couch, I suggest you pipe down. She hung up, and for a second, I felt the crushing weight of their collective indifference. They didn't want to know. If they acknowledged the abuse, they'd have to take responsibility. If they admitted she wasn't safe, they'd have to act. Ignorance wasn't just bliss for them, it was a financial and logistical necessity. I drove to the hospital for my shift, but I didn't go in. I sat in the parking lot and called a woman named Dana Prescott. She was a lawyer whose name was whispered in the hospital hallways whenever a difficult case involving nursing home negligence came up. I don't have much money for a retainer, I told her, my voice shaking. I don't need a retainer for this, Dana said, her voice like cold steel. If the evidence is what you say it is, we work on contingency. But Shelby, you need to understand something. Once we start this, your family will turn into a pack of wolves. They'll see a lawsuit as a threat to their future. Are you ready to be the villain in their story? I looked at the hospital entrance, where the lights were bright and the world was clinical and honest. I've been the villain for 5 years, Dana. I might as well get a title for it. The silence from the family after Eleanor's hip surgery was the most honest thing they'd ever given her. While she lay in the orthopedic ward, drugged and drifting, not a single one of them sent a flower, a card, or a text. I was the one who signed the surgical consent forms under emergency contact. I was the one who sat with her until 4 a.m. as the anesthesia wore off. When she finally opened her eyes, she didn't ask where Donna was. She didn't ask for Mark. She looked at me, her eyes clouded with pain but sharp with a terrifying clarity. Maya, she rasped, using my middle name as she often did when she was being serious. The red ledger. Is it safe? It's in my bag, Grandma. Right here. Good, she breathed. They think I'm fading. They think the anesthesia will finish what the loneliness started. They're waiting for the unfortunate news so they can finally stop feeling guilty. She reached out her hand, her skin translucent, and gripped my wrist with a strength that shocked me. We aren't just filing a complaint, Maya. We're filing a war. I want you to go to my old house. Not the one they sold, the small safe deposit box at the bank on Main Street. The key is in the lining of my blue purse. I did as she asked. 2 days later, I stood in a private viewing room at the bank, my hands trembling as I opened the small metal box. I expected jewelry, maybe some old stock certificates. Instead, I found a stack of letters. They were dated from the last 3 years. Dozens of them. They were addressed to Donna, Mark, and Linda. They were in Eleanor's handwriting, pleas for visits, descriptions of her fear at the facility, invitations to Sunday brunch. And every single one of them had been returned to sender. Unopened. I flipped them over. On the back of each envelope, in Donna's sharp, distinctive scrawl, were notes like, "Return to sender, Mom is being dramatic again, and don't let her guilt trip us." My breath hitched. They hadn't just ignored her calls. They had actively rejected her attempts to reach out, documenting their own cruelty in the process. They had left a paper trail of abandonment that they thought would never see the light of day. I took the letters and the red ledger to Dana Prescott's office. She looked at the returned envelopes, then at the ledger entries where Eleanor had meticulously recorded every day she waited for a reply that never came. "This isn't just a negligence case anymore," Dana said, a grim smile touching her lips. "This is a record of a family's moral bankruptcy. The jury is going to hate them." "How long will it take?" I asked. 2, maybe 3 years. "Can you keep showing up while they hate you for it?" "I've had a lot of practice," I said. But as I left the office, my phone buzzed. It was a notification from the Blackwood Circle group chat. Donna had posted a photo of a brand new Mercedes she'd just leased. The caption read, "Spending a little of the future today. Life is short." The bile rose in my throat. She was already spending the money from a woman whose hip was held together by titanium and whose heart was held together by a ledger. But as I scrolled through the heart emojis and congrats from the rest of the family, I realized something. They thought they were the ones waiting for a windfall. They had no idea that while they were celebrating their future, I was secretly meeting with a second lawyer, someone who didn't handle negligence. Someone who handled estates. And as I walked into James Caldwell's office, I realized the $3 million settlement was only half of the story Eleanor wanted to tell. The fluorescent lights of the attorney's office buzzed with a low, predatory hum that matched the vibration in my own chest. I wasn't here to talk about the bruises anymore. I wasn't here for the neglected water pitchers or the broken call buttons. I was here for the attendance ledger. James Caldwell, a man whose suits looked like they cost more than my entire nursing education, sat across from me, turning the pages of the red book with a reverence usually reserved for ancient scripture. "Your grandmother is a remarkable woman, Maya," he said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone. "Most people in her position retreat. They wither. She, however, has spent 1,800 days building a fortress. This ledger isn't just a diary. In the eyes of the law, it's a chronological record of abandonment. It's evidence of a total breakdown in the familial duty of care." I shifted in the leather chair, the scent of expensive tobacco and old paper filling my lungs. "She wants to change it all, doesn't she? The will, the estate, everything." Caldwell leaned back, the light glinting off his silver-framed glasses. "She isn't just changing it. She's scorched earthing it. But for this to hold, for this to be bulletproof against the inevitable storm your Aunt Donna is going to whip up, we need a clinical foundation. I need her primary care physician, Dr. Pratt, to certify her cognitive state every single month. We need witnesses who have no stake in the money. We need the nurses who actually see you there at 4 a.m. on a Tuesday." I thought about the night shifts, the blurry-eyed drives, the way my heart would sink every time I saw the empty visitor log at the front desk. The staff at Silver Pine, they know me. They don't know the rest of them. They think Eleanor is an orphan with one very tired granddaughter. "Good," Caldwell said, tapping a heavy gold pen against the desk. "Let them keep thinking that. Because while we're building this legal cage, your family is out there digging their own graves. I've seen the group chat screenshots you sent. The Blackwood Circle. They're discussing the division of assets that haven't even been settled yet. They're treating your grandmother's life like a carcass they've already begun to skin." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. This was the secret war. Every Saturday morning, I'd sit with Eleanor, drinking our hazelnut coffees, and we'd talk about the crossword or the birds in the garden. But underneath the small talk, there was a tactical mission. She'd tell me about the phone calls she'd made, the ones they ignored, and I'd record the timestamps. She'd show me the happy birthday cards she'd written that were sitting in her drawer because she knew if she mailed them, they'd just be tossed in the trash unopened. "Maya," Eleanor had whispered to me during my last visit, "don't feel guilty. They chose the silence. I'm just the one who's finally going to make it permanent." I looked at Caldwell. "If we do this, they'll say I manipulated her. They'll say I isolated her to get the money." "Let them," Caldwell replied, a predatory smile spreading across his face. "We have 5 years of visitor logs, 3 years of returned letters, and a red ledger that proves you were the only one who showed up when there was nothing to gain. They're the ones who isolated her. You're just the one who stayed." The headline didn't just break, it detonated. Silver Pine Care Facility settles for $3 million in negligence landmark case. I was in the hospital break room when my phone began to vibrate so violently it skittered across the table. The Blackwood Circle chat, which had been a desert of indifference for months, was suddenly a monsoon of notifications. "Donna, oh my God, did you see this? $3 million. Mom must be rich. Mark, wait, if the settlement is that high, the punitive damages must have been insane. Who handled the case? Why weren't we notified? Linda, Shelby, answer your phone. We need to know what's going on with Mom's finances. This changes everything." I didn't answer. I watched the bubbles dance on the screen, 19 people suddenly deeply concerned about a woman they hadn't seen in half a decade. Within 48 hours, the narrative shifted with breathtaking speed. The woman they had called dramatic and selfish for selling the house was now our beloved matriarch and the survivor. Vera sent a bouquet of lilies to the facility, the wrong flowers. Eleanor is allergic to lilies, with a card that read, "We've been praying for justice every day. Can't wait to celebrate with you." Celebrating. That was the word they kept using. They weren't celebrating her recovery, they were celebrating the comma. They were calculating their shares of $3 million before the ink on the check was even dry. "Maya, look at this," Eleanor said, handing me her phone during my Saturday visit. It was a message from Craig. He'd sent a photo of a luxury RV he'd been eyeing. "Hey Grandma, so glad you're doing better. Once things settle with the legal stuff, I'd love to take you on a road trip. You deserve the best." Eleanor's laugh was a dry, rattling sound. "He didn't even ask if my hip still hurts. He just wants to know if the RV fits in the budget." "What are you going to do?" I asked, watching the Blackwood Circle chat escalate into a full-blown planning committee for a surprise reunion. "I'm going to let them come," she said, her eyes turning to the garden window. "I'm going to let them bring their flowers and their bakery cakes and their rehearsed apologies. I'm going to let them think they've won. Because a predator is never more vulnerable than when it thinks it's finally cornered the prey." The morning of the reunion felt like the air before a massive electrical storm. I arrived at Silver Pine at 8 a.m., 2 hours before the Blackwood invasion was scheduled to begin. The common room had been transformed. Nurse Patty, who had been our only ally in that sterile place for years, was helping set up extra chairs. She kept catching my eye, a look of profound pity on her face as she watched the festivities take shape. "You ready for this, Mrs. Hargrove?" Patty asked, adjusting the tray table in front of Eleanor's wheelchair. "I've been ready for 1,800 days, Patty," Eleanor replied. She looked immaculate. She was wearing her old teaching suit, navy blue, pressed, and professional. She'd pinned her hair back, and for the first time in years, she'd put on a soft pink lipstick. She didn't look like a victim. She looked like a woman who was about to hand out the hardest failing grades of her career. "Maya," she whispered, beckoning me closer. "Is the lawyer on standby?" "Caldwell is 5 minutes away," I said. "He has the notarized copies. Dr. Pratt's evaluation is attached to the final page." "And the ledger?" I looked down at her lap. The red ledger was there, half hidden under a white linen napkin. To anyone else, it looked like a place to set a teacup. To us, it was the detonator. At 10 sharp, the sound of clicking heels echoed down the hallway. Donna led the charge, carrying a massive bouquet of sunflowers, again, the wrong flowers, and wearing a smile that looked like it had been painted on with a stencil. Behind her came Mark, Linda, Craig, and a swarm of cousins I hadn't seen since I was in high school. The room exploded into a cacophony of fake joy. "Mom! Oh, you look wonderful!" Donna squealed, leaning in for a hug that Eleanor barely returned. "We've been so worried. We've been trying to get down here for months, but you know how the traffic is on the interstate. And the work schedule," Mark chimed in, patting Eleanor's hand with a forced familiarity that made my skin crawl. "But we're here now. That's what matters, right? The family is back together." They filled the room with their loud voices and their cheap sentiment. They cut the bakery cake and poured the tea. They talked over Eleanor, talked for her, and talked about the exciting future now that the settlement was finalized. "We were thinking," Mama Teresa, Craig's wife, said, leaning in with a conspiratorial whisper, "that we should really talk about wealth management. $3 million is a lot for one person to handle, and we want to make sure you're protected from, well, from people who might try to take advantage of you." She shot a pointed look at me. The room went silent for a heartbeat, the accusation hanging in the air like a foul odor. They were finally doing it. They were casting me as the villain in front of the grandmother I'd spent 5 years protecting. Eleanor set her teacup down. The porcelain clicked against the saucer with a sound like a gunshot. The room froze. Actually, Eleanor said, her voice clear and carrying the weight of 37 years in a classroom, Teresa is right. We should talk about the future. But before we do, I'd like to show you something I've been working on. She reached down and lifted the white linen napkin, revealing the red ledger. The family stared at it, their smiles faltering, their eyes darting between the book and Eleanor's stone-cold expression. It's a record, she said, her fingers tracing the leather cover. And I think it's time I shared the results with the class. As she opened the first page, the door to the common room opened, and James Caldwell walked in, carrying a briefcase that seemed to suck all the remaining light out of the room. The silence that followed James Caldwell's entrance wasn't just quiet, it was heavy. It was the kind of silence that precedes a verdict. My Aunt Donna's smile didn't just fade, it curdled. She looked at the sharp suit of the attorney, then at the thick leather briefcase he set purposefully on the table next to the store-bought cake. "Who is this, Mom?" Donna asked, her voice octaves higher than it had been seconds ago. Eleanor didn't answer her directly. She didn't have to. She simply adjusted her reading glasses, the silver-framed ones I'd bought her at the mall 3 years ago when her old ones snapped, and opened the red ledger to the very first page. "This is James Caldwell," Eleanor said, her voice reclaiming the authority of the schoolteacher she had been for nearly 4 decades. "He's here to witness the reading. You all drove a long way to celebrate the good news. But before we talk about the future, we need to acknowledge the past. It's a matter of record keeping. And as you all know, I was always very particular about my records." Craig shifted in his seat, his palms flat against his knees. Teresa's eyes darted toward the door. The vultures were suddenly realizing they weren't at a banquet, they were in a cage. March 8, 2021, Eleanor began. Her voice was steady, rhythmic, devoid of the tremor that usually came with her age. "The day I moved into this facility. Shelby visited. Brought coffee. Hazelnut. No one else." She turned the page. The crisp sound of the paper echoed in the sterile room. March 9th. No visitors. No calls. March 10th. No visitors. No calls. She looked up, her gaze locking onto Uncle Mark. He looked at the floor, his jaw tight. April 2nd, 2021. Easter Sunday. No visitors. No calls. No cards. Shelby called at 7 a.m. and stayed on the line for an hour so I wouldn't have to eat breakfast alone. No one else. "Mom, this isn't fair," Donna blurted out, her face flushing a deep, angry crimson. "We were busy. We have lives, jobs, children. You can't just count the days like we're in primary school." Eleanor didn't flinch. She didn't even raise her voice. She simply held up her hand, the universal signal for a student to be silent, and continued. July 4th, 2021. Independence Day. The facility had a barbecue. I sat on the porch for 4 hours. No visitors. October 14th. My 80th birthday. Shelby brought lemon cupcakes and a cardigan. Nurse Patty sang. No one else. She began to flip faster now, the entries blurring into a rhythmic chant of abandonment. December 25th. No calls from children. January 1st. No visitors. May 12th, Mother's Day. I received a text from Derek with a thumbs up emoji. No visitors. The room was suffocating. Marlene was already crying, a jagged, wet sound into her sleeve. The rest of them sat frozen, paralyzed by the sheer, documented weight of their own absence. They had lived the last 5 years in a comfortable fog of tomorrow, but Eleanor had lived it in a ledger. She was reading back their own lives to them, and the reflection was hideous. For 1,826 days, Eleanor said, closing the book with a final, echoing thud, I have sat in this room. And for 1,826 days, only one name has appeared in this ledger with any consistency. I didn't keep this book to be cruel, Donna. I kept it because when you're left alone long enough, you start to wonder if you still exist. This book was my proof that I was still here. And it is also the proof of who else was. The big reveal wasn't just about the money, it was about the math. James Caldwell didn't waste time. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a stapled document, the blue backing of the legal paper looking like a death warrant in the morning sun. As of 6 months ago, Caldwell announced, Mrs. Hargrove finalized her new last will and testament. This document was prepared with 2 independent witnesses, notarized, and supported by a comprehensive cognitive evaluation from Dr. Wendy Pratt. It is, in every sense of the word, airtight. Donna stood up so quickly her chair scraped violently against the linoleum. The old will split everything 4 ways. You can't just change that because you're upset about a few missed visits. That $3 million is family money. It's the compensation for what our family went through. Eleanor looked at her oldest daughter. There was no anger in her eyes, only a profound, weary clarity. The settlement money is not family money, Donna, Eleanor said. It is compensation for the nights I lay on a cold bathroom floor waiting for a call button that didn't work. It is compensation for the bruises on my arms that you told me were age spots. It is the price of the pain I endured while you were at your country club mixers and your kitchen renovations. She gestured toward Caldwell, who began to read the operative clause of the new will. I, Eleanor Blackwood Hargrove, being of sound mind, do hereby bequeath the entirety of my estate, including the proceeds of the legal settlement with Silver Pine Care Facility, to my granddaughter, Maya Shelby Afton. The explosion was instantaneous. I knew it. Teresa shrieked, pointing a finger at me. I knew she was brainwashing you. She's been in your ear for 5 years, feeding you lies, isolating you from us just so she could swoop in and take the millions. This is elder abuse. This is a scam. You're a monster, Shelby. Craig roared, stepping toward me. How could you do this to your own mother? Your own aunts? You're stealing our inheritance. I didn't move. I didn't have to. James Caldwell stepped between us, his presence like a stone wall. Mr. Hargrove, Caldwell said, his voice dropping an octave in warning. The only person who isolated your mother was the person who failed to visit her for 5 years. The records of this facility show that Shelby Afton is the only family member who has signed the visitor log since 2021. If you want to talk about abuse, we can discuss the returned letters in my briefcase, the ones marked returned to sender by your sister Donna. The room went white hot. Donna's jaw dropped. She looked at the briefcase, her face draining of color as she realized the secret war wasn't just Maya's word against hers. It was a paper trail. The settlement is a refund, Eleanor said, her voice rising above the chaos. A refund for the love you didn't give. A refund for the time you didn't spend. You didn't show up for the woman, so you don't get to show up for the money. Maya showed up when I had nothing. She showed up when I was a burden. She is the only one who has earned a place in my future, because she was the only one who cared about my present. The tension in the common room had reached a breaking point. The vultures were no longer pretending to be mourners, they were frantic, cornered animals. Vera was pacing, her pashmina snagged on a chair, her eyes darting around as if she could find a legal loophole hidden in the ceiling tiles. This won't hold, Vera hissed, her voice trembling with a mix of greed and desperation. We'll contest it. Undue influence. We'll say she's senile. We'll say Maya manipulated the medical records. No judge in this state is going to let a 28-year-old nurse walk away with $3 million while the children are left with nothing. Eleanor watched her daughter with a strange, haunting calmness. She looked at me, and for a second, I saw the woman who used to grade my spelling tests, the woman who taught me that every action has a consequence, and every silence has a sound. You can try, Vera, Eleanor said. You can spend years in court, and you can watch the last of your own savings disappear into legal fees. But you should know one thing before you start that journey. Eleanor reached into the side pocket of her wheelchair and pulled out a second, smaller envelope. This one wasn't a legal document. It was a photograph. She set it on the table next to the cake. It was a photo of the Blackwood Circle group chat, a screenshot I'd taken months ago. It was the message Donna had sent about her new Mercedes, the one where she joked about spending the future today. "I've seen the chats," Eleanor said. "I've seen the way you talked about me when you thought I wasn't listening. I've seen the way you calculated my death before my hip was even healed." Donna stepped back as if the photograph were a poisonous snake. The room went cold. The excuses, though we were busy, though we cared from afar, all of it died in the face of that single, glowing screen. "But that's not the surprise," Eleanor whispered, her eyes turning toward the clock on the wall. "The surprise is that I'm not the only one who's been keeping records." Suddenly, the heavy glass doors of the common room pushed open. 2 men in dark suits walked in. They weren't lawyers. They weren't doctors. Nurse Patty stepped forward, her face a mask of professional resolve. "Mrs. Hargrove? The technicians are here for the final verification." "Verification of what?" Donna demanded, her voice cracking. Eleanor smiled, a slow, terrifyingly peaceful smile that told me the real secret war was only just beginning its final phase. "Verification of the secret room," Eleanor said. "Maya, tell them. Tell them what we found in the walls of the old house before they sold it." The family turned to me, their faces a mosaic of horror and confusion. I looked at the red ledger, then at the 19 people who had forgotten that an old schoolteacher never forgets a secret. "The $3 million settlement was just the beginning," I said, my voice as cold as the tile floor. "You all were so worried about the bank account, but you forgot to check the floorboards." The explosion didn't come with a bang. It came with the sound of a zipper. James Caldwell reached into a secondary compartment of his briefcase and pulled out a digital tablet, sliding it across the polished mahogany of the common room table. On the screen was a high-resolution photograph of a hollowed-out floorboard from the master bedroom of the old Blackwood estate, the house Donna had sold in such a frantic rush to liquidate the burden. "You were so eager to get rid of the drafty museum, Aunt Donna," I said, my voice cutting through the stifled gasps. "You sold the house for $450,000. You thought you were being clever, offloading a liability. But Grandma taught 3rd grade for nearly 40 years. She didn't trust banks, and she certainly didn't trust the children who only called when they needed a cosigner." In the photo, nestled in the dust beneath the joists, were 3 heavy, fireproof lockboxes. Donna's face went from a panicked red to a ghostly, translucent white. Her hand flew to her throat, her fingers tangling in the pashmina that now looked like a noose. "Those boxes contain the actual Blackwood legacy," I continued. "Gold bullion, vintage savings bonds, and the original deed to a plot of land in the valley that happens to sit directly in the path of the new highway expansion. Total estimated value? Upwards of $4 million. And because you sold the house as is without ever stepping foot inside to help your mother pack, you nearly threw it all away. I'm the one who went back. I'm the one who bought the salvage rights from the new owner for $500 while you were busy leasing that Mercedes." The room tilted. Craig looked like he was going to vomit. Teresa was hyperventilating. The vultures had spent 5 years circling a $3 million settlement, only to realize they had literally walked over a $4 million fortune every time they'd visited as children. "You call me the long game player," I whispered, leaning into the center of the circle. But the game was already over before I even started the car. "Grandma didn't just keep a ledger of your absences, she kept a ledger of your greed. She knew that if she told you about the boxes, you'd have moved her into a penthouse just to keep her quiet. She wanted to see what you'd do when you thought she was worth nothing. And you showed her. You showed her exactly what she was worth to you." Donna lunged for the tablet, but Caldwell pulled it back with a sharp, practiced motion. "This is evidence of a secondary estate, Donna. And just like the settlement, it has been placed into a restricted trust. You aren't just disinherited from the lawsuit. You're disinherited from the history of this family. You sold the house, so you sold your right to its secrets." Eleanor sat in her wheelchair, her hands folded over the red ledger, watching her children unravel with a look of profound, tragic peace. She wasn't enjoying their pain, she was simply watching the natural conclusion of a story they had written themselves. The aftermath was a slow-motion car crash of legal threats and moral collapse. For the next hour, I watched the Blackwood Circle disintegrate in real time. Donna tried to pivot, screaming that Eleanor was clearly compromised and that I had looted the estate. Mark tried to play the diplomat, begging for a family meeting to discuss a fairer distribution. But every time they opened their mouths, James Caldwell simply tapped the red ledger. 1826 days, Caldwell would say, his voice a rhythmic hammer. Which of those days were you here to help her pack? Which of those days did you check the floorboards? Which of those days did you even know she was alive? One by one, they broke. Marlene was the first to leave, her face buried in her hands, her daughter leading her out like a wounded animal. Then went Craig and Teresa, arguing loudly in the hallway about whose fault it was that they hadn't checked the house. Mark followed, his head bowed, the weight of his gold watch suddenly appearing too heavy for his wrist. Finally, it was just my mother, Linda. She stood in the corner, her spine straight, her eyes fixed on Eleanor. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. She just looked at her mother, and for a split second, I saw the little girl who used to pick daisies in the garden of the old house. I was afraid of Donna, my mother whispered, her voice so thin it barely reached us. I was afraid if I took your side, she'd turn the whole family against me. I chose the pack over you, Mom. And now I'm the only one left in the cold. Eleanor looked at her middle daughter. The hardness in her eyes softened, just for a moment, into something that looked like grief. The pack doesn't keep you warm at night, Linda. Only the people who show up do. You didn't choose Donna. You chose comfort. And comfort is a very lonely thing when the lights go out. My mother turned and walked out, her heels clicking a hollow, rhythmic beat on the linoleum. The common room was suddenly, shockingly quiet. The half-eaten cake sat on the table, a sticky monument to a reunion that had turned into a funeral. The sunflowers were already starting to droop in the artificial light. Eleanor reached out and took my hand. Her fingers were cold, but her grip was like iron. Is it done, Maya? It's done, Grandma. The trust is sealed. The house is gone. The secret is out. She nodded, her eyes closing for a long moment. I used to grade my students on 3 things: effort, accuracy, and attendance. Your family had the accuracy to know exactly when I was dying. They had the effort to show up for the money. But they failed the only test that ever mattered. They failed to be present. She picked up the red ledger and handed it to me. It felt heavier than it had that morning. It wasn't just a book anymore, it was a testament. It was a 5-year map of a woman's heart, charted in the ink of her own isolation. Keep it, she said. Because one day, someone is going to try to tell you that you were the villain. Someone is going to try to rewrite this story and say that you stole a legacy. When they do, you show them this. You show them the dates. You show them the silence. Because the truth doesn't need a lawyer, Maya. It just needs a witness. The sun was beginning to set over Silver Pine, casting long, golden shadows across the garden window. The technicians had finished their work, the lawyers had gone home to file their motions, and the Blackwood Circle group chat had been deleted, the members scattering like ash in a high wind. I sat with Eleanor in the quiet. We didn't talk about the millions. We didn't talk about the gold or the land or the lawsuits. We just sat there, watching a cardinal flutter at the bird feeder I'd hung the previous spring. Maya, Eleanor said softly, her eyes fixed on the bird. Do you know why I stayed? Even after the fall? Even after the bruises? Because you had no choice. I suggested. No, she said, turning to look at me. I stayed because I wanted to see if I was wrong. Every Tuesday, every Saturday, I would pray that the elevator door would open and I'd see Donna, or Mark, or your mother. I kept the ledger because I wanted to be proven a liar. I wanted to reach the end of the year and see a page filled with different names. I wanted to lose the game, Maya. I wanted to be wrong about my own children. The weight of that statement hit me like a physical blow. She hadn't been positioning herself for a win. She had been desperately hoping for a loss. She had been giving them 1,826 chances to prove her heart wrong, and they had failed every single one. But you showed up, she whispered, her thumb stroking the back of my hand. You showed up when I was just a cranky old woman in a drafty house. You showed up when I was a broken body in a sterile room. You didn't even know about the floorboards, did you? I didn't care about the floorboards, Grandma. I just liked the hazelnut coffee. She smiled, a real, radiant smile that stripped 30 years off her face. She reached into the bag at her side and pulled out a brand new notebook. It was identical to the one she had just given me. Same red leather. Same gold-edged pages. She picked up her pen, her hand steady, and wrote the date at the top of the first page. Saturday, April 6th. The family came. They learned the truth. Maya stayed. We had coffee. The sun went down. She closed the book and set it on her lap. This is the new volume, sweetheart. The one where we don't look back. The one where we only record the people who are actually in the room. I looked at the visitor log at the nurse's station as we rolled her back toward her room. My name was the only one on the page for today. But as the elevator doors opened, a young man stepped out, a cousin, Derek, the one who had sent the thumbs up emoji. He looked pale, his eyes red-rimmed, carrying a single, small bouquet of daisies. Real daisies. White petals, yellow centers. He didn't see the lawyers. He didn't see the cameras. He just saw his grandmother. He stopped, his voice trembling as he spoke. Grandma? I'm sorry. I don't want the money. I realized I don't know what your favorite color is. And I didn't want to wait until it was too late to ask. Eleanor looked at him for a long, agonizing minute. The silence stretched until it felt like it might snap. Then, she slowly reached out her hand. It's yellow, Derek, she said, her voice soft but welcoming. Just like the daisies. Come in. Maya, get another cup. It looks like we have a new entry for the ledger. I walked toward the kitchenette, my heart feeling lighter than it had in half a decade. I realized then that the long game wasn't about winning an inheritance. It was about who is still standing when the money is gone and the lights are low. It's about the names that get written down when there's no one else left to take attendance. As I poured the coffee, I looked out the window at the darkening drive. The Blackwood legacy wasn't in a box beneath the floorboards. It wasn't in a settlement or a bank account. It was in the simple, devastating act of showing up. And in the end, that's the only thing that ever truly counts. My grandmother taught 3rd grade for 37 years. She graded on attendance. And as I brought the 3rd cup of coffee to the table, I realized that for the first time in 1,826 days, the class was finally in session.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe Family Files for more.